Awesome. Thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know me, I'll give a little bit of an introduction, but just a word of caution about the slideshow that I'm going to do, the PowerPoint I put together. I thought it was really interesting. Nick Sutner earlier from Sony just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do a full PowerPoint because just all of the bureaucracy of getting all of that approved is so cumbersome, and that's exactly my thought process. Like a month ago when Brian invited me to do this, I was like, all right, by the time I'm doing this talk, I'm not going to be at Nintendo anymore. I can go crazy with this. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I was really excited about it, and I put it all together, had all these really funny images and all this stuff that was, I was like kind of doing this stream of consciousness in my head and playing through the whole thing. And just last night, I went back to the deck, and I was going through it, and I was like, what the hell is this? What am I going to be speaking at each one of these things? So I apologize in advance. There's a whole bunch of these things where there's actual, images and, kind of engaging, and then there are others where I'm just falling back on, like, tried and true bullet point slides. So anyway, my name is Dan. I just recently left Nintendo. It was really interesting, that whole process, very surreal. I didn't expect it to make a whole lot of news, and for those of you who are hearing about it for the first time, maybe it didn't make a lot of news, but for me personally, it made a ton of news. And I think everyone probably has had that experience where, you're at a job for a long time, you feel like people don't appreciate me enough, that I contribute so much here, and people don't get that, and they're going to miss me if I ever leave. And like to have that validated by a 9-page NeoGAF thread has just been absolutely amazing to me. But before last week, I ran basically the digital distribution stuff, the indie stuff at Nintendo. Most recently, that was Wii U and 3DS eShop. And so games like Shovel Knight recently came out, 1001 Spikes, Guacamelee. And before that, WiiWare and DSiWare, so games like World of Goo, the Bit Trip series, Retro City Rampage, a lot of those were on those systems. Prior to that, I was at Xbox, and I was part of the launch team. I was there from about 1 year before the launch all the way through just before Xbox 360 launched. And so some of the things I did was like contract negotiations with third-party publishers, strategy work with Xbox Live, and so I was part of the team that put together Xbox Live Arcade. So I've been in the digital distribution scene for a while, and just to kind of give a sense of how far back it goes, this is what, for those of you who remember, this was like the first iteration of Xbox Live Arcade. So digital distribution was still so much in its infancy that the client couldn't be distributed digitally. So there are all these discs that we would put out, or we'd put the client with a game like Project Gotham Racing 2 or something like that, where you could have the client and you'd fire it up, you needed the disc to launch it, and then you could download these games. And so I don't know if you can actually read it, but all of the categories kind of assumed that this was all going to be for a very casual audience. I don't think at the time anyone really understood the explosion of creativity that all this would bring to bear. So anyway, I've been involved in digital distribution and the indie scene for a while, and one thing that I've noticed is over the years is that a lot of developers have a lot of problems with the business side. So I wanted to give some pointers on that. I forgot to mention, before I was at Xbox, I actually lived in Japan for a long time, for about 7 years, and I went to this curry restaurant all the time called Koko Ichiban, and so for years, when I was living in Japan, I would go there a couple times a week and eat there all the time, and then when I moved back to the States, I couldn't get it anymore. And a few years ago, they opened up a few restaurants in LA. So every time I was in LA, which was like E3 and Indiecade, I would get together with some people and we just all go to this restaurant together. So you can see Brian sort of in the middle there. Zach Aikman is somewhere in the audience, and he's in this picture. And whenever we do it, it's like 15 guys getting together. It's a lot of fun. And at one of these dinners, the reason I mention this, other than if you're at E3 or Indiecade, let me know, and so I'll add you to the list, and we can take over the restaurant. But at one of these dinners, it came up, they were asking about, what's your background? And I talked about how before I was at Xbox, I actually got an MBA and was kind of really going on a business track. And so the person asked, I don't even remember who it was, just said, so, tell me about, give me one insight that, that from your business education that you think I should know. And my answer to him was that indie games are a really bad business to be in. And I felt like, I kind of crushed his soul a little bit, and I felt really bad about that. So I thought that deserved a little bit more of a thorough answer about why I say that and what things people can do to make themselves, to improve the probability that they will actually reach success. So the most important thing I learned in business school, first and foremost, is that if somebody offers you a mint, you should take it, because you never know why they're offering you the mint. And in the indie game space, that goes double for deodorant. So shouldn't happen that much. Anyway, so now getting into actual businessy stuff. I'll talk a little bit about strategy and economics and some of the learnings that you can take from that and apply to the indie business itself, and so you can kind of understand what the implications are and what that will do to guide your thinking along those lines. So when people hear economics, I think a lot of people automatically think the T-bills and the Dows doing this and interest rates, and all of that is definitely one part of all of that scene. But there's really a whole lot that theoretical economics can say about strategy and what anyone could apply. So one of the things that you learn about is in business school is this thing called Porter's 5 Forces. And Porter's 5 Forces is really a Cliff Notes way of taking a quick look at an industry and saying, how easy is it to make money in a very sustainable way? So to the extent that you can do something very sustainable and you can keep earning lots and lots of profit, that's a really good business. And this is really a shorthand for investors to do a really quick and easy analysis of what the profit potential is for a business. So you can imagine, if you apply this to any industry, let's say, the car industry, you could see suppliers and how powerful are the suppliers. So if you're a carburetor manufacturer, you don't have a lot of power over Toyota, for example, or and your buyers. So what is that dynamic in that relationship, and where's your kind of strategic position? But really, time and time again, what's been proven out is that the most important factor in determining your success is the threat of potential entrance and how easy it is for people to enter the industry. So, as an example, I don't know if there are any car buffs in the audience today. I'm personally not one, but the whole auto industry is on the cusp of a big revolution in terms of electric cars. So Elon Musk and Tesla, they've just made all of their patents open to everybody. But I would argue, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that even if there's someone who likes cars even more than video games, no one in this room is seriously thinking, I'm going to go grab those patents and I'm going to start my own startup auto manufacturer. Because the barriers to entry are really, really high. You have to build a factory, and that takes land and resources and all kinds of investment. Whereas indie games, you need a laptop, you need internet. That's basically it. Anyone can get started. They teach. My daughter, who's in middle school right now, she went to a summer camp where they taught Unity. She made a game which honestly, she did it in about a week. It's better than some of the stuff I've seen on the App Store. So, the barriers to entry are not that high. And so, one of the principles that you learn in, kind of basic Econ 101 economics is this idea that there's kind of two models. So the first thing that you start learning about is like, how does, the supply wind up matching with demand, and how much do people produce? And the model for someone who cannot dictate any price, like there's a commodity, like the price of wheat or the price of eggs, there's very little differentiation, so there's not much you can do. You basically accept the market price. Whereas if you are making a product that is more differentiated, you are able to dictate your own price a little bit more. And in economics, usually the way you adjust your price and and control that price is in terms of restricting output. And the way you restrict output is just you manufacture less of something, and the amount that you should manufacture is when the marginal revenue that you're going to get is equal to the marginal cost. And so what that means, and I'm going to bring this back home to why is this relevant to video games in a second. So marginal revenue is basically how much more money you can get for one more copy of your game, and marginal cost is how much does it cost you to produce one more. So the challenge is that marginal cost for indie games is 0. So if you have a game and you've already done all of the work, there's nothing, you're not at the point where you're deciding, should I spend all this time and money to make a game? You've already made the game, and it's already out there. You would potentially be willing to sell it to somebody who otherwise wouldn't buy it. You would sell it to them for 1 cent. It's a cent that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and there's nothing keeping you from saying, I'll just sell it to you for a cent. And so you've got this situation where more and more people are coming into the industry, and more games are coming out, and everyone's first thought is, well, how do I, I'll keep just reducing my price so that all of, so I can just get to, stay as profitable as I can and just squeeze out as much revenue as I can. And so it paints actually a pretty dismal picture of the industry. And so, you've got all these new entrants bidding down the prices, and there's no real floor because everyone's costs are already spent, and so people just want to get as much as they can for it. So because of this dismal kind of picture, it often baffles me why professional business people who don't care about video games, why they're even doing video games. Like why, so it makes me think, like for anyone who's like, a professional video game, runs a studio, and their primary model is cloning other games or doing, some of the, Zynga style, free-to-play, very, trying to squeeze money out of people. It makes me think, not only are they bad game designers, but they're also bad business people. So, and probably bad people in general, just overall. So I offered to them, they're not in the audience, unfortunately, but I offer a suggestion. They should just open a Subway. I actually did a little bit of research. Opening up a Subway is relatively low risk. You can make a pretty nice living. I would encourage, if you meet any of these guys, maybe pass this suggestion along. So anyone who's in the business, thank you, yes. So anyone who's in the business, really, if they don't love it and they don't feel like, I can't not do this, that really has to be the mindset. There are some people who actually make a ton of money in video games, absolutely, but there's so many more who don't. And so one of the things I really want to be doing is educating everyone on what they can do to maximize their chances, because I want to make sure that if you do have a good game, that you have a fighting chance of getting by and making a living. This isn't about like making sure that everyone's going to be multi-millionaires, though great if that happens, but hopefully that everyone can make a sustainable living out of this. So some of the things that you have to do is like in that whole scenario that I was painting, where you're either a wheat farmer or you're creating this own product that nobody else can do. Excuse me. You want to be on the side of the equation where you are able to set your own price. You've got a unique product that nobody else has, and really the only thing that you have that nobody else has access to is you. So do something that is very personal to you, that makes you stand out. And in addition to that, make sure that's communicated. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that people talk about when they're doing marketing. So what does marketing mean? So I deliberately chose like cheesy kind of businessy slides. It was great when I was doing this thing like a month ago, and there are all these awesome transitions like this. So one of the things that every marketer learns, like when you take just a standard marketing class, the main thing that people will talk about is the 4 Ps: price, product, promotion, and place. So I'll go through each one of these and how it applies to indie games. And just so that everyone's aware, marketing should not be considered a dirty word. This is not about how do you trick people into buying your game. This is about representing what you've done so that people know about it, and so that people who would want your game will know about it and will buy it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So the first P is product, and this is really the most important one. If you don't have a good game, there's virtually no amount of marketing that will really save you. So first and foremost, it has to be a good game. Production values matter. People will judge your game very quickly based on how it looks, and that's unfortunately very superficial. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be super polished in the sense that it looks like a AAA game. It just has to look different enough so that people will stop and pause and think about it and notice it. So standing out from that perspective is important, and then polishing it and making it look like a finished product is important. But a lot of other things go into defining what the product actually is, whether it's the genre, the theme, how difficult it is. And all of that has to work together as a cohesive whole. And one of the things that in all the years working with developers, releasing games on Nintendo platforms, one of the things I think I've seen a lot of people get wrong is they'll do something where they'll have a very cute art style, and it looks almost childlike in the art style, but the gameplay is actually really difficult. It's like maybe a really difficult puzzle platformer or something like that, where it's just really hard to finish any of the levels. And so what you run into is that kids are immediately, young kids are attracted to this game. They say, oh, look at the cute game, and then they, the parents buy it and they try it out, and the kid can't play it, and so they're upset. And meanwhile, there are people who would really like that game if they were to try it, but they're never going to try it because it looks like a cutesy kids game. So making sure that you're thinking about how does that product feel overall to everyone. Differentiation is important. So knowing anything that's similar to your game. So if you've got different, a standout game mechanic, absolutely important. And, experimentation with game mechanics is important. And yet you will find probably somebody who's done something along similar lines. It's good to know about that and how you're different. Making sure you can communicate that. And then finally, you've got to know who is going to like your game. So one of the things that I think a lot of the business people in the industry get wrong is they will start from audience and go to the game instead of the other way around. And I think it's much more important, especially for indies, to make the game that you want to make first and foremost, say, this is my passion project, this is what I want to make. But then you should put it in front of as many people as possible, and I think the playtesting talk was from this morning was fantastic. But get people to play your game, put it in front of as many people as possible, and I think you might be surprised every once in a while, like if you have a booth at PAX, And there will be some people who just keep coming by and keep playing it, and talk to those people. Understand, like, it might be, you thought that this would appeal to, men 18 to 24. That's kind of like the standard stereotypical game demographic. But it might be like a group of junior high school girls just keep coming over and they just love the game. There might be something interesting there. You might want to be talking to those people. Are those people just atypical for who they are, or is there something there that really resonates with them? And understand why that is. So price. A lot of people also over the years have asked me, like, what should I do with price? And one of the mistakes that a lot of people often make is they'll go through with the mindset of, I've got this game, and all the other games that are kind of similar to my game are $15 or $20, and my game, I think Rami was saying earlier, like, you only see your flaws in your game, and you don't see how good it is, and so you say, I'm not as good as these other games, so I'm going to price my game a little bit lower, and that way people perceive me as a value. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where every one of us in this room has probably 100 games on Steam that they still haven't gotten around to playing, that they know are good games. And maybe they've even tried for like 15, 20 minutes, and like, that was a really good game. I'm going to go back to it when I have more time. So unfortunately, you're competing not only with every other game that's out there that people are deciding to buy, but stuff that people already own. So if your game is really worth $15 or $20, then you should absolutely charge that, because otherwise people will just assume that the game is of lower quality than it probably actually is. And I was talking to a guy on Twitter, now that I'm allowed to be back on Twitter, and he sent me a link to his game, and I looked at it and looked at the screenshots. I didn't have a chance to download it and play it, but it looked really, really good, and it was 99 cents. And so I asked him, like, why is this 99 cents? And basically he was just saying, well, I was hoping people would give it a try because it's so cheap. And I think that sends the wrong message. If it's cheap, you can throw it away. It has no value. So it's part of communicating the value of what you create. Another benefit of aiming high is that, over time, over the life cycle of your game, you're going to want to be able to drop the price. And if you're already starting off low, you don't have that much room to go. You can always go down. It's much harder to go up. Bundles are also a great way of just kind of squeezing out that additional revenue from the game. There's also a lot that you can do in terms of increasing awareness of the game. So after it's been in a bundle, I've heard that other ancillary revenue streams, like if you have any DLC, you can make some more money there, and there's other strategies that you can do, and also just more people playing and talking about your game. But one of the things that kind of concerns me about, when I think about the health of the overall indie scene, is that what's helpful for any one person is often at odds with what's helpful for everybody. So in an ideal world, if we could all kind of coordinate and say, let's not ever drop prices. These games are valuable, and your choices are, a $60 retail game or a $15 or $20 indie game, and all the prices were about that. I think we would all do very well overall. But we're, of course, in a situation where if one person says, well, I'll just drop my price to $10, that's going to get a lot of attention, and so people are going to go there. So it's, one of these things where I hope over time, like the industry is going to start moving away from these massive discounts. I think it's great for bringing in awareness for and new customers, so that people start buying and playing more indie games, and once they get a taste, then they can buy more stuff. But it does concern me a little bit if everyone needs to race down to 99 cents. So the next P, they call it place in marketing. Usually it's actually distribution or where you're selling it. Actually, we could substitute platform and still keep the 4 Ps, so it's nice and easy to remember. A lot of people will start off, first of all, thinking install base. And install base is absolutely important. The more customers you have to sell to, the more money that you can make. But there's also other factors to take into consideration in terms of, like I said before, like where is your audience? So if you're doing some play testing and everyone that is playing the game everyone has Steam. We already know that. But let's say, after talking with everyone, you find out most of them have Vitas. Then maybe you should consider making it for the Vita. Or if everyone there has a 3DS, maybe you should consider making it for the 3DS, because that's where your audience is. So those are the kinds of things, as you're talking to the people who are playing your game and seeing how they're responding, kind of paint a picture of like who these people are and what motivates them. So one good example of this is recently Shovel Knight announced a lot of their sales numbers of what they saw on Wii U, 3DS, and Steam. And I don't recall the numbers specifically offhand, but it was roughly a third. Wii U, 3DS, and Steam. Hopefully there are no journalists in the room, but I'll say that rarely happens. It's usually, Steam sells incredibly well, and Wii U, the average concurrent users on Steam is higher than the entire Wii U install base altogether. So normally you would expect that the Steam sales would be much higher, but the nature of the game, if anyone here has played it, it feels very much like an old school Nintendo kind of game, like from the SNES era. And I'm sure as those guys were talking to their consumers, they were really feeling that nostalgia when people would pick it up and play it, and they're like, oh, this really reminds me of the days when I'd play games like this on my SNES. And so all those people that they talked to, they had Wii U's, they had 3DS's, and so that really tapped into that, and that's why I think that game resonated so well on Nintendo platforms, so disproportionately well, I should say. So thinking about that, also think about discoverability. The App Store is probably the best example of this. There's hundreds and thousands of apps out there, so how do you stand out in that crowd? And so maybe that, thinking in terms of the ratio of install base to games on the system, and so you can kind of see of like how big of a consumer base can I get? And then the last piece is really about, so Nick was talking a little bit about some of the things that PlayStation can do for you and what Sony can do for you if you are releasing your game on their system. And if their workings are similar to the way Nintendo works, everyone has their favorites, and there are some games that people get really excited about. And so whenever there are opportunities like the E3 booth or the PAX booth or things like that, if I was really excited about a game at Nintendo, I would see what I could do to make sure that, when we're featuring something in our PAX booth, we're going to put that game front and center. And if we're going to be doing something like on the, I'm blanking on, any kind of advertising about, putting things at retail where we give examples of like, here are some of the games you can get on eShop. I'm going to put my favorite games in those things so that people are aware of them. And so if you're talking to all the different platforms and there's somebody at one of the platforms who's like, holy crap, I love your game. The world needs to know about your game. I'm going to help you, work with that person. That person will be an ally. They can make things happen for you. And that leads to the next point of promotion. One of the things that promotion, probably the most impactful promotion that you'll get is how your game is appearing in any of the storefronts. And there's data on this. I know we have at Nintendo. I'm sure Sony has similar. If you have a game on the front page and you take it down from the front page, the sales changed dramatically. And I don't want to betray any specific numbers, but it's a significant drop off from when you're very visible on the first thing versus not. And so to the extent that the platform is really in your corner and wants to make sure that they're highlighting your game as much as possible, that's really going to be really helpful for you. So another thing that I'd encourage you, I forgot to mention on the platform side, for each of these platforms, watch somebody, kind of in the same vein of playtesting, just watch somebody go through and buy a game and just like surf through the catalog, and you'll be surprised like at how little attention people pay to each game. And so they're just kind of scrolling through. So anything you can do to make sure you're front and center is actually going to be important. So another thing to consider is how you appear on that storefront. So if there's screenshots that you need, I've talked to a lot of people where they just grabbed any old screenshot for their game. Spend the time and figure out which screenshot is really going to show your game in the best light, so that when people see it, they're going to be attracted to it. And again, I think, was it in the playtesting, or I can't even remember which talk it was, but in the elevator pitch, like seeing which way of describing a game people respond to, spend the time to do those kinds of things so that you can find out. So I'm going to have to talk even faster. So how people are responding to it. So let's see, PR. Again, the more you know your audience, the more you can talk to them directly in the ways that they want to talk to. So if everyone you're talking to, they get all their gaming news from YouTube, then try to make sure that you're doing all these Let's Plays and things like that. If they're going through traditional game media, then make sure you're talking to those guys. And do it early, because a lot of people, this is another common mistake that I find, is like people are so focused on making the game, and then they're finally done and they're like, all right, let's start marketing it now. And it's going out, we're out of money, so we're going to ship next month. Now let's start to market it. And you really need a slow, steady build-up. It really takes a long time. You have to hit people over the head, over and over and over before a message actually sinks in. Chris Hecker did a really good talk about this at the IGF. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, about Nobody Knows Your Game. And he talked about like all this press he did, and still so many people had never even heard of Spy Party. I'm sure the people in this room who follow that would probably know it, but you want to sell to a bigger market than just the people in this room. So networking, this is kind of shifting gears, but I talked a little bit about, if you're trying to communicate through traditional press and you want to get press, what you really can't do is at the very last minute just try to build up a network. That it takes time to build up a network. And think about it from either a journalist or a platform perspective of, nobody likes it when somebody comes up to them and the first thing they do is ask for a favor. It takes a lot of time to build up a rapport before, and maybe doing a lot of favors for them so that it feels like there's this reciprocal relationship. And I think within the indie community, everyone does a really great job of helping each other out. But a lot of times when people go to the press, it's like, I've never talked to you, I've never acknowledged your work, I've never said anything about what you do, I don't even know what you do, but please give me my game a good review and do me this favor. And it's like, well, they don't know you. So I think Rami also mentioned, if somebody writes an article and you really liked it, let them know that. If they are writing an article about something and maybe it has nothing to do with your game, but you have a friend who's working on a similar game, let them know that so that you can kind of connect people. And I always know, like, for me, like when I was at Nintendo, I was trying to get some of the best games to come to to my platform, and I always felt great reaching out to people who I already knew and I had done favors for and established a relationship before they were successful. So if it ever got to a point where somebody was already successful by the time I went up to them, it made it, I felt like a dick. Just like, hey, you're successful, now I want to talk to you. I would never have given you the time of day before, but now that you're a big shot, now I want to talk to you. And that, I felt sleazy, even though, that was not, how I normally am. I would talk to people who weren't successful. In fact, that's a lot of times what I do. Still, I felt like I'm too late. I've shown up after they were already successful. Why should they want to talk to me? All right, so this is Edmund McMillan, pre-Super Meat Boy. This was like my first introduction to Edmund, and which was not the best first impression. In fact, I gave him a courtesy phone call back, and mostly it was just to get him off Reggie's back. And so, that's obviously not a situation. And since then, we've become friends, and it was much easier. And I kind of laugh about it now because it's like, oh, now I know Edmund. That makes sense that in that context. But before, I was like, who's this guy? So anyway, I am out of time. So let's see, negotiations. I'll just recap very quickly. It's worth your time, even though it's an awkward, uncomfortable conversation to have, to spend the time to do it. And most of negotiation is not about, how quickly do you think on your feet and how quickly can you, respond and do deals. It's really more about thinking deeply about not only your position, but the other guy's position, and, what do you both want? What is it that they are most interested in? What are you most interested in? Finding something where you're getting what you most are interested in, and making it so that they can get what they're interested in as well. I'm going to just blaze through all this. So this is one of these things. This is my shameless plug. So my presentation before, it was all full of stuff like this. And then I was like, what the hell is this? This one I remembered what it was. So I'm starting a new thing, really just to help indies with the business stuff. So it's like, I'm still working out my elevator pitch about what it is I think I'm going to be doing, and is it a consultant, or am I an agent or a PR person? And it's kind of like a mix of all of that. And none of that at the same time. So really just helping indie teams with the business and kind of guiding them through it so that they can avoid common mistakes, that they're handling the business side with the same level of care that they are with the game itself. And that's really critically the most important thing. And so that's it. I'm not going to wait to run through the whole Git. All right, well, you will. And so here is my contact information. All right, thanks.